Before I begin my massive put down of John Atkinson for the next 10 minutes.
Be nice.
I just want to say that it was only a few years ago that I referred to the other magazine that I now write for right up on this stage. I called it the obsolete sound. And I'm writing for them now. So we all have a good sense of humor. We all can take a joke. We like to think. So let me begin by saying that John Atkinson was too large to fit into the trunk of my car. So in order to measure him, I had to drive from New Jersey to his home in the lightest, whitest, most Italian section of Brooklyn, New York. After all, any full John Atkinson review must include measurements.
Indeed.
Yes.
During the drive there on an impulse, I detoured over to the Brooklyn kibbutz, where Stereophile's entire writing staff currently lives and works together. Their collective is conveniently located between two of the group's favorite watering holes, John DeVore's Brooklyn Navy Yard facility and the audio hemophiliac Steve Guttenberg's place. All of these hangouts are situated close to the shrine where the group goes to worship fashionista and faux audio manufacturer Devon Turnbull, who some of you probably know. Turnbull's antique low-watt single-end impedance-modulated tube-amp circuitry and Altec Lansing voice of the theater's loudspeakers, best seen and heard from behind movie screens, are, the collective insists, not the past, but the future of high-end audio. This must be very exciting for John to read that kind of thing. Alas, nobody was home when I got there. I'd forgotten it was Sunday, and the note read, "We are at Devon's worshiping Devon." But seriously, enough kidding. How to take the measure of someone like John Atkinson? I can't think of another individual in this business who combines the sensibilities and skills of a musician / music lover, a scientist, and a journalist. Can you? I can't. So if you're going to measure John Atkinson, you better bring the best measurement gear that you know of, which is why I came well prepared with the latest Dr. Ronnie Jackson biometric test equipment. The very same setup Dr. Jackson used to so accurately measure and assess Donald Trump's health. John welcomed me into his home. I set up the test equipment in the garage, and I got to work. Dr. Jackson's unusual test gear runs not on electricity, but on high-quality alcohol. The more you apply it with, Jackson insisted, the more accurate the results. Same with the test administrator, he assured me before he passed out. The well-fueled test gear indicated that, like Trump, John Atkinson is 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighs in at a svelte 156 pounds, and of course, no surprises there. We know that. I placed the former Stereophile editor on the treadmill I brought and preconditioned him for a half hour at an eighth of his normal walking speed. And at the end of that time, according to Dr. Jackson's test gear, John Atkinson's measured performance indicated that he had the heart, circulatory system, and prostate of a 20-year-old. John was pleased with the test results, promising to return to the 20-year-old who lives down the block everything but the prostate, which he said he intended to keep. I actually used that joke here a few years ago, but I figured I'd repeat it. Continuing my John Atkinson review, Atkinson is a well-constructed, rear-ported design. Unfortunately, because my time was limited, I did not have a chance to measure or examine the port, but I trust it produces both deep low-frequency extension and, when called upon to deliver it, prodigious output. You can't go wrong with a duty joke. But I did have time to visually assess the cabinet, which, due to its complex shape, has no parallel surfaces and thus avoids standing waves, and for that matter, as much as possible, just plain standing. A knuckle wrap in the right places indicated a sturdy, well-braced enclosure. In other areas, the knuckles actually encountered little resistance and actually disappeared up to a half a foot within the enclosure, which is filled with a mixture of hops, barley, and Cave Labs Deoxit D5. Measuring John Atkinson's frequency response required me to use a small floor jack to raise him off the floor, spin him around more than a few times, and laugh till I was silly, which I did. These measurements correlated well with what's long been observed. John Atkinson is now and has long had a history of being extremely bright. Not as in beamy, shout-at-you kind of brightness, but as a smooth, consistent, well-dispersed brightness experienced more as clarity and transparency than as brashness or swagger. That history includes more than 43 years in audio magazine publishing, 33 years as Stereophile editor, and more than half a century as an audiophile. John's academic background in the UK was in the sciences, in which he excelled both in high school and college. He was headed for a teaching job, but his other passion, music, playing it as well as listening to it, got in the way. It was the early 1970s, and like many of lads bitten by the Beatles bug, he was working by day and playing in bands at night. The day job was doing scientific research. In 1972, the band he played bass in was signed to Warner Brothers, given a healthy advance to record at Abbey Road Studios, and scheduled to go on tour in support of the resulting album. It was every kid's dream come true, until it turned into a nightmare. The manager had taken the money, Abbey Road was never paid, the tour was canceled, and for John Atkinson, it was back to university and back to being a science teacher, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the passion for playing and listening to music remained, and John took gigs playing in bands wherever he could find them. He joined another group, and in 1973, the group went on the road backing Helen Shapiro. Helen who? 14-year-old Helen Shapiro had become a child singing sensation in the UK, topping the charts more than once in 1961. In 1963, she toured opening for the Beatles. After 2 years of touring with Helen Shapiro, the group left Helen, signed to DJM, Dick James Music, see Elton John, and recorded an album at Sawmill Studios, engineered by Jerry Boyce, who later recorded, among many other greats, the Buena Vista Social Club. John learned a lot watching Jerry Boyce at the desk and was again on his way. But the album stiffed and it was back to playing local pubs in Brighton, not much money in that. But as fate would have it, John, an avid reader of the HiFi mags, saw in 1976 that HiFi News and Record Review was looking for an editorial assistant. John was interviewed by Paul Messenger, a familiar name to many here, and he got the job because John once could. Unlike the other applicants, he could spell. But I'm sure Messenger saw more in the lad than his ability to spell. At some point along the way, John, like many of us, became immersed in reading and understanding measured audio performance, convinced the better something measured, the better it must sound. Until he experienced what many, if not all of us have, a piece of gear that measured great, but didn't sound so good. Or a piece that measured so well, but sounded more pleasing and more like what music actually sounded like. The tension between John the scientist and John the musician has served him and his readers well for decades. John took the HiFi News job, learned magazine publishing from the inside, and was soon appointed deputy editor. The editor at the time, John Crabb, was busy writing a book about Beethoven, so in 1982, at age 34, John realized that he was really the editor of HiFi News and Record Review, and soon thereafter, he was so appointed. And once fully immersed in the job, he understood that everything in his background, science, teaching, and even holding together all of the magazine's parts, much like his bass playing skills held together a band, made him uniquely qualified for the job. Under John's leadership, HiFi News and Record Review had in short order doubled both its revenue and circulation. Nonetheless, John found himself butting heads with upper management. Welcome to publishing. That's what always happens. Someone in America took notice of what John was doing at HiFi News, and in November 1985, Stereophile's publisher Larry Archibald called. Archibald made John an offer he couldn't refuse, carte blanche control of Stereophile's editorial content. And in May of 1986, after moving to America, John Atkinson became editor-in-chief. In a relatively short period of time, Atkinson took Stereophile from being a sleepy, irregularly published digest and turned it into a regularly published, full-size powerhouse of a sleepy magazine. Just kidding. Under Atkinson's leadership and his insistence that the magazine publish measured performance along with observational-based reviews, I hate the term subjective because that's not what it is, Stereophile became what many consider to be the world's leading audiophile magazine, reaching a circulation peak in excess of 72,000, the world's highest circulation English language audio and music magazine. John Atkinson retired as editor-in-chief in 2019, and today John is Stereophile's technical editor in charge of all measurements, and he regularly contributes reviews. He's measured over 900 speakers.
Oh my.
But John's decades as Stereophile's editor-in-chief and guiding light is only part of the story, because in addition to all of that, he also has a distinguished career as a recording engineer. And I would like to say, if you want to hear an example of his work, get a copy of The Doors of Heaven, performed by the Portland State Chamber Choir. Try that one, find it online, and you will understand how great a recording engineer he is, as well as everything else that he does. Some people have asked me if it's uncomfortable for me to be making this presentation since I've left Stereophile and got back to where I once belonged. So to clarify, there's no discomfort. John Atkinson had nothing to do with me leaving, nor did the current editor. I left Stereophile and Analog Planet to build my own website, trackingangle.com, and
what was it called?
Trackingangle.com. And when the Absolute found out, when the Absolute Sound found that I was leaving, they made me a great offer, and I couldn't turn it down. So that's what happened. But none of what's happened to me would ever have happened were it not for John Atkinson believing in me and being willing to hire me back in the 1990s, giving me the guidance and wisdom to often save me from myself. And I will miss the measurements. I just have to tell you one quick story. When I was originally at the Absolute Sound, I was a bulldog for the Absolute Sound. I said and did things in support of the Absolute Sound and went after these guys in a way that Stereophile used to have a party at the Consumer Electronics Show every year. And everybody in the industry was invited to it. And the guy at the door was this guy, Ken Nelson, who has since passed away, but he guarded the door and let people in and didn't let other people in at all. I was one of the people he would not let in. He said, Mikey, you're not getting in. I've read what you've read about us, and you don't belong here, you're not getting in. So, but after that, John hired me, and I thank you forever for that. And now I'm off to doing something else. But really, so it's with the greatest pleasure and utmost respect that do I do the presentation or do you do it?
No, you do it.
I get to do it. Okay, so do you take it out of the shoebox here?
Better believe it.
It's like a shoe salesman here, this box. So it's with great pleasure and utmost respect that I present to John Atkinson the most deserving recipient I can think of the LA and Orange County Audio Society's Founders Award. And my wife said, stay home, you're sick. Do this by Zoom, and I said, no, I have to be here. I have to give this to John personally, and I'm glad I came to do it. I'm feeling better now. I'm not 100%, but I don't think I'm ever 100%, but I'm doing okay. Okay, so here it is. So John, I was pretty gentle, right? I didn't.
Yeah, but you said everything I was going to say.
Oh. Take away the offending comments.
Well, thank you, Mikey. Yeah, it's been a long, long voyage. I'd like to say thank you to the Los Angeles and Orange County Audiophile Society, which Bob Levy once told me in total confidence is the largest audio society in the world. Don't let that get out. I know he told it to me in confidence. But yeah, it's been a long trip. Let me take you back to 1959. I was 11 years old. I had a clear, high soprano voice, and I went to a grammar school, English equivalent of junior high, high school combined. And I joined the school choir. And because I have this high soprano voice, I got to sing solos in the choir. I got things like Handel's Messiah. I then started to play violin, and I joined Chamber Music Society for the school. I played in the school orchestra. I played violin in the county youth orchestra, which was a great place to meet girls, I can tell you. And then my voice broke. My high soprano turned into this croaky baritone you are now listening to. But I kept playing in the orchestra, and then in 1964, as Mikey said, I bought a bass guitar, joined a pop group because we all wanted to be the Beatles. And I learned something from all this experience in music. I was never, ever good at team sports. The only sport I was any good at was swimming, which is not a team sport unless you accidentally drown one of your competitors. But I found that when you're playing music in a group, any group, you're part of a team. you're contributing to something which is bigger than the sum of the parts. And that had a huge impression on me. Playing the bass guitar was an even bigger influence, because when you're the bass player, the girls in the audience aren't looking at you, the fans aren't looking at you, but you, with the drummer, are actually holding down everything. You are creating the musical foundation for what is happening for the singer and the lead guitarist to shine and attract all the fans. But it is so important to be a bass player, to learn that. Magazines. I've been an audiophile. We weren't called audiophiles back then, we were hi-fi lovers. Since the mid-60s. My mother bought me a Grundig tape recorder and I started to make my own recordings of the bands I was in, which has sort of led to my dual career as a recording engineer. And then I went to university, and in England, university is free, something I wish it was true in this country, since my youngest daughter went to New York University. Yeah. Anyway, that money, sure, NYU was put to good use, and we're building things in Manhattan. Anyway, so university was free, but you got a government grant for help for your expenses. So it was 1966, so I went out and bought my first system with it. It was a Gala 25 turntable, a Trio Kenwood amplifier, and a pair of Wharfdale Super Linton speakers. And at that time, I read all the magazines. In England, HiFi News, Gramophone magazine, occasionally we would see Hi-Fi Stereo Review from the US. And something I realized about those magazines was that the reviewers and writers were not like us. They were like Olympian beings handing down pronouncements from on high. Okay, well, I assume that's how the world runs. Those people at the top tell those at the middle and bottom like us what to do. So that's how it was. So, had my scientific career. If ever you see a green LED, I was part of a team in England which worked on how to increase the efficiency of green LEDs. And then, as Mikey said, in '72, I got a call from a drummer I played with in several bands. Said this: I've met this singer-songwriter, Matthew Ellis. He's got a tour booked up in the US. We're going to start at a place called My Father's Place on Long Island, which I actually have driven to since, just to see where it was. And we signed a deal with Warner Brothers. We're going to make an album, Abbey Road. And it's like, oh my God, Abbey Road, the Beatles studio. Well, we did most of the work in Studio 3, but we did one special afternoon in Studio 2, the big studio where the Beatles recorded. As Mikey said, the manager ended a runner with the money. Abbey Road didn't get paid. Warner Brothers canceled the release of the album. The American tour was canceled, and I was out of a job. So, I thought, well, I'll play with whoever will pay me. And that I did. And then I got a postgraduate teaching certificate during that time while I was working as a musician, because my wife and I felt, well, I had to do something, as a backup career. That I liked teaching, except it was spoiled by the presence of children. So that didn't work out. And then we signed with DJN in '75. We made an album, The Sawmills, worked with Jerry Boyes, as Mikey said, and the album came out, got rave reviews, and it didn't sell any. So then, everything fell apart, and my then wife in '76 said, you like hi-fi. HiFi News, here's an ad, HiFi News wanted an editorial assistant. So I applied for it, and it's a true story. Came down to two of us who were rivaling for the job, and we had to submit 3 record reviews and an equipment review as part of the audition, and the other guy couldn't spell, so I got the job. Next 6 years, I kept my mouth shut and my eyes and ears open, because I knew nothing about publishing. And did my job, interviewed a lot of musicians, interviewed audio engineers, And I came to realize that what I had learned in the 60s and early 70s about magazines, where these Olympian beings of reviewers handed down judgments, was wrong. That reviewers, editors, writers are just like ordinary people who just happen to have been privileged to get in a position of hearing a lot of stuff. They developed their hearing, but so would anyone in that position. So, 82, I became the editor. The CEO of the company later told me that, you know, HiFi News was doing so badly that we had the choice. We either could close the magazine or make you editor. So we made you editor. Well, you know, what was to lose? And as Mikey said, I applied what I learned about being part of a community of people who love music and ways to make that music sound better. I applied that to the magazine. That we would, you know, we grew the circulation. In England, where every circulation is not subscription-based, it's newsstand-based, so you could see every month whether you're succeeding or not. And we grew and we grew. I had some run-ins with management. When Compact Disc was released, I did a deal with Denon in Japan to do a test CD. But they would charge us £8 each. What is it called? Freight on board, whatever. Anyway, that's the price you pay. And they ordered 1,000 of them. And we would release it as the HiFi News test CD, which we did in '85. Company changed hands. And I had a meeting, called into a meeting with the new CEO, and he said, we've been thinking about your proposal to release this CD, and we decided we're not going to do it. It's just too expensive. And I said, oh, I've already done it. And he said, well, what happens now? And I said, well, we ordered 1,000 at £8 each, and they're all sold. So can we move on? And he's like, all right then, don't do it again. And that kind of summed up my relationship, other than with Larry Archibald, my partner in Stereophile when I joined, with all the senior management at the publishing companies for whom I've worked. I've done things which I know were the right thing to do, and then senior management decides that, well, maybe you shouldn't have done that, and I point out that, well, the numbers add up, so they let me get away with it. So, yeah, so I joined HiFi News, left HiFi News in '86, joined Stereophile. I was, as I said, you know, having problems with senior management at the new company, wasn't making life fun. And then out of the blue, Larry Archibald called in November '85 and said, would I like to come and join Stereophile? And I said, well, let me think about it, Larry. Let's talk at CES. Put the phone down and started to pack. And Larry gave me the opportunity to take everything I'd learned about creating a magazine, about making a magazine that was part not just of Olympian reviewers, but of reviewers, readers, audio people, engineers, manufacturers, designers, PR people, to make this community make a magazine which would grow. And grow it did. When I joined circulating, my first issue was August '86, and the circulation was about 3,000. And by 15 years later, we were at 92,000. And all because Larry let me give everything I learned into making Stereophile what it was. Oh, hold on, let me just check my notes. My iPad's gone off.
What was it like working with Jay Gordon Holt?
Oh, yeah, Jay Gordon Holt was the editor, founder of Stereophile in November 1962.
Those early days.
Gordon was a brilliant man, but the one word he really hated was work. So after Larry bought Stereophile in 1982, and Gordon said, Gordon, you continue as editor, we're going to increase publishing frequency, we're going to want you to do more work. And Gordon was like, not sure I want to do that. So, you know, by '85, Larry asked me to join the magazine because Larry was actually doing all the editing and all the publishing, and Gordon was like, well, thank you very much, Larry. So the two things which I learned through chance was being a member of a team, which the team could do things which were greater than all the members of a team could do individually, and being part of a community that to serve that community with a magazine and with records and with shows and with e-newsletters and with a website, all part of this vision to expand the magazine but also serve the community. So I'd just like to say thank you to all the members of my team over the years, the reviewers, the writers, the art directors, the copy editors, the layout people, the typesetters in the day when there were typesetters, and to Larry Archibald for giving me that opportunity. I'd also like to say thanks to my wife of 35 years, Laura. Both my first two marriages broke up. First was when I was a musician, and I was gigging more than 200 nights a year. And okay, that's bad enough, not being with your wife. But when I was home, I was not alive. And she noticed that, I mean, there's a book called The Daft Stellar by Walter M. Miller, exactly about this, about an actor who, when he is not on stage, is just a blank. And that's kind of how I was on the nights when I wasn't gigging. So my first wife left me for a soccer player of all things. And then, but before she left me, she did point out the ad for HiFi News, so I'm eternally in her debt. Married for the second time, the same year that I became editor of HiFi News. And although I was home, I was working all the time, because becoming the editor, even though I'd been the deputy editor, becoming the actual editor and realizing just how much work was involved meant, again, I wasn't paying any attention to my marriage. And she left me in 1985. My third wife, Laura, who I met in 1987 at the first Stereophile show in Santa Monica, she was in publishing. She worked for Audio magazine, and she knew the pressures that an editor has to deal with, that magazine publishing involves. She was also of enormous help to me with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, because, you know, Mikey said, I came to the United States, blah, 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 blah. It's actually extremely hard to come here. I bought a book and went after Larry offered me the job and I accepted it. And it said, you know, English people who want to work abroad, and they listed all by country, the countryside, thumbed through to U for USA, and basically there was one paragraph that said, don't bother, it's really hard. So, I came here on a tourist visa. Oh, nothing, not recording this, sorry. Anyway, the immigration lawyer I hired said, deluge the INS with paper. They love paper. The more paper you can give them, the bigger the chance you'll get the H-1 visa, the one that Melania Trump got for being a super special person. So Laura, who worked at Audio, they had a complete set of HiFi News, and she photocopied everything I had ever written for HiFi News, and I presented this huge stack of paper to the INS office in Albuquerque to prove that although I was never a trained journalist, but I wasn't a trained editor. I nevertheless had a written track record, and I got my H-1 visa. I was the only person ever to get one to come to work in this country who didn't have it as a magazine editor or journalist, who had no formal training in that subject. And there we go. Laura has put up with me for 35 years. The fact that I before I retired, was spending up to 12-hour days, 7 days a week, getting the magazine out, reviewing, writing, putting together the website's content, which I actually still do. So I'd just like to say thank you for Laura for supporting me for all those years. And then finally, thank you to all of you. You are the community that I have devoted my life to serving by providing you with magazines, with recordings, with shows, with e-newsletters, with website content. It's been the most fulfilling experience a person could ever have. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And thank you to Bob Levy for creating this society. It's unique.
You're very welcome.
All right.